Welcome to the Funeral Consumers Alliance of Eastern Massachusetts Story of Our History. I am Patty Muldoon, and we are celebrating our 60th anniversary as an active organization. Today, we will be reading to you the history, and it was created by Eva Moseley, who has done extensive research. Eva was curator of manuscripts at Radcliffe College, and she's also the co-founder and current board member of Green Burial, Massachusetts. Eva joined our organization back in the 1970s and has been on the board since 2010. Paula Chasen, who will be reading, is also on our board, joined in 2010 as a board member. She's a retired nurse practitioner in psychiatry and an amateur cellist and birdwatcher. Fred Hapgood joined our board a year ago, and he is a retired science writer and is a current Shine volunteer. I'm Patty Muldoon. I became president in 2018. So we offer to you the presentation about Funeral Consumers Alliance of Eastern Massachusetts' 60-year history as we know it.
61 years ago, in 1961, some Unitarian Universalists began to talk about a possible memorial society in Boston. After a gestation period, the society was legally established in March 1962, which is why it is now, after several name changes, 60 years old. Some name changes concern geography.
Was it a society from Massachusetts or New England?
No, there was already one in Springfield, and soon there were others in other states.
The major name change early in this century happened because crematories, which are businesses, not nonprofits, called themselves cremation societies.
So we became the Funeral Consumer Alliance.
There were 25 founders in 1962.
And they were all men.
The same issues and purposes motivated the founders that still motivate us today, ensuring that funeral consumers get fair prices, choices of the goods and services they want, and that they not get any they don't want, and honest information.
For instance, embalming does not preserve bodies forever.
Memorial societies were part of the new consumer rights movement. In a later Boston Globe article called It's Your Funeral, Alex Beam dubbed us the Consumers' Union of Death. In 1963, Jessica Mitford's book, The American Way of Death, spurred the growth of U.S. memorial societies from some 17,000 households to nearly 1 million.
Mitford inspired some of us who are still here to join.
In the early years, new members were asked to visit one or more funeral homes, ask about goods, services, and prices, and report to the society what they learned and how funeral home staff treated them. The society, at first under President George Richardson, MD, kept a list of, quote, sympathetic funeral directors, end quote, to recommend to those facing a funeral. It promoted planning ahead, making so-called pre-need funeral arrangements so that survivors would know what one wanted.
For years, the Memorial Society kept copies of individual funeral plans, but long ago gave up doing that.
Some of us remember Richardson's annual invitation to the Memorial Society's meetings. As he retired after 21 years as president, he recalled that we consistently made the simplest and least expensive funeral arrangements available to those who wanted them. while he was also aware that people of different backgrounds and cultures have different funeral needs. Dr. Richardson got the society tax-exempt status, and at a particularly low point in the society's fortunes, he moved the whole operation into his house in Nahant.
It's possible that Rebecca Richardson, the great woman behind this great man, did some of that work.
Funeral directing was a new profession emerging after the Civil War. Before that, families did it themselves with the help of a local carpenter, a local religious society, and whoever managed the cemetery. In 1904, the Commonwealth of Massachusetts recognized the profession by establishing a board of registration in embalming, later adding, and funeral directing. 4 of its 5 members were and are still funeral directors, and only 1 represented consumers. The EM board, it's called, because it's embalming, the EM board scoffed at Dr. Richardson's sympathetic funeral directors, and one member declared that,
after reading the Memorial Society newsletter, he felt that the tone and the editorializing showed a negative attitude toward funeral homes.
He evidently didn't understand why.
money was an issue in most disputes between the Memorial Society and the funeral industries. The M board and the profession were resolutely opposed to making prices known. Not only were funerals the undertaker's livelihoods, but we didn't and we don't die fast enough. In most states, ours included, there were too many funeral homes, so some undertakers tried to milk each funeral for all it was worth.
One embalmed a 12-year-old boy, and he expected his parents to pay, even though they had told him they didn't want embalmed.
Keeping prices secret and therefore flexible helped some funeral homes survive.
At the expense of some consumers.
So when Memorial Society members learned funeral home prices and made them public, the M board was irate, declaring,
wrongly,
that making prices public was not allowed. Another Memorial Society stalwart, Treasurer Byron Blanchard, often tangled with the M board, attending many of its monthly meetings. At one of these meetings, the board voted unanimously to allow him to speak.
For 5 minutes.
Nearly every meeting included a non-public adjudicatory or executive session, another aspect of undertaker secretiveness. A major recurring issue was who could pick up and transport a body from the place of death to where it would be prepared for burial, cremation, or donation. The M board maintained that only funeral home personnel could do this, and that it had to be in a hearse. It stuck to this rule even after it was told that such limits were unconstitutional under both the federal and state constitutions. The Supreme Judicial Court had declared this.
In 1909.
Long before the Memorial Society was thought of.
The M board even convinced the State Department of Public Health that its picking up bodies rule was legal. It was the Memorial Society that told public health the truth. Finally, in 1996, the M board agreed that other persons than undertakers could transport bodies.
And that a pickup truck would do.
The Memorial Society kept making prices public and urging that they be publicized in funeral home ads. We and other memorial societies started advocating for a national funeral rule. In 1975, the FTC,
Federal Trade Commission,
announced that it was considering a new rule to encourage competition among funeral homes. The rule would require undertakers to print price lists for all their goods and services, to give such a list to anyone who walked in and asked for one, and to read it to anyone who phoned. Both George and Becky Richardson testified for the bill to create federal regulations of funeral homes. The Memorial Societies won. The funeral rule went into effect in 1984. But soon, when Byron Blanchard visited one funeral home 3 times, he was not only not given a price list, but was told that the home had no such list. Then the FTC tested 40 Massachusetts funeral homes.
10 failed to provide a price list and were referred to the Funeral Rule Offender Program.
Its acronym, appropriately, is FROP.
More recently, we and other funeral consumers alliances
FCAs
have lobbied the FTC to require funeral homes to have price lists online. We are still waiting for that change.
However, we just got the start of the change. 2 days before we had our annual meeting, on October 20th, 2022, the Federal Trade Commission proposed a new rule requiring all funeral homes to post their general price list on their websites, which all funeral homes now have. Public comments will be needed as we move forward to actually enact this new proposal. We are thrilled.
The funeral rule was also meant to discourage disparagement of inexpensive merchandise or disparage a consumer's interest in price consideration. Some undertakers shamed grieving customers into paying more than they could afford. One told a customer wanting an inexpensive funeral,
You can have a new Cadillac or a used Ford.
By implication, the shabby Ford showed a lack of devotion to the departed. An even bigger challenge to the funeral industries is do-it-yourself funerals. Anne Berman Osnos of Cape Cod wanted to bury her mother
When the time came, of course.
without an undertaker, and asked the Memorial Society to get the law changed so she could do that. But no change was necessary.
Massachusetts law already allowed anyone to take charge of a dead body as in the old days.
One has to get a death certificate and a burial or cremation permit, and then one can care for the body with or without the help of a home funeral guide. It doesn't just save, excuse me, it doesn't just save money. Active involvement by family or friends helps them through the grieving period, while turning it all over to a professional who didn't know the deceased can reinforce feelings of confusion and helplessness in the family. The Memorial Society encouraged people to plan ahead, but we have increasingly warned against paying ahead. The person to be buried might move out of state. The funeral home might go out of business, or a dishonest undertaker might somehow lose the money.
One in Wakefield was said to have pocketed more than $200,000 in pre-need payment.
There are better ways to set money aside.
And I would clarify that funeral homes are no longer allowed to take the money directly. It must go into trusts of another institution, such as a bank or financial institution. So we've also helped incorporate those protections for consumers.
And if you do plan ahead, be sure to tell your likely survivors so they know what to do and what not to do. Another sympathetic funeral director and a different sort of hero was Peter Steffen of Worcester, who died this year. Peter lived his conviction that every dead body deserves reasonable, dignified treatment. For years, he applied this to the indigent.
In 2000, for instance, He took on 164 indigent burials, although the state stipend,
maximum $1,100.
hadn't changed since about 1980 and covers only a fraction of costs.
Often payment is long delayed due to red tape, so an undertaker may not bother to apply in effect, providing a free funeral. Peter Stephan also applied his conviction to the marathon bomber. When Tamerlan Tsarnaev was killed in the aftermath of the bombing, no one in Greater Boston would touch him. One of us, who, like the Tsarnaevs, lived in Cambridge, had this thought.
Surely there are already some criminals in Cambridge Cemetery.
But no room for Tsarnaev.
Facing daily protests, even death threats, Peter stepped up. He prepared the body and made sure it was buried. FCAEM has had other heroes. In the early 2000s, Nancy Acola managed the organization almost on her own. When she'd had enough, she called a meeting and got others to divide up the work. Since then, we've had several presidents.
All women.
And enough other volunteers to staff the phone line, manage finances, conduct price surveys, produce a newsletter and an annual meeting, table at conferences, send speakers to various groups, and sometimes monitor the M board. Byron Blanchard, considering undertakers the enemy, resembled a terrier, ever ready to sink his teeth into the M board's ankles. Jack Osgood, who helped Byron monitor the M board, thought they could get better results by being friendly and cooperative. That's a challenge for us.
Can we be watchdogs and work with funeral directors for better results for funeral consumers?
About those indigent burials, for example, we and undertakers agree that the state contribution to the cost is inadequate. Can we and they together get the state stipend increased?
So that all undertakers will care for their local poor.
This year, working with the FCA of Western Massachusetts, then with both the M Board and the Massachusetts Funeral Directors Association, we drafted a funeral consumers fact sheet and got it posted on a state website. Also recently, the Funeral Directors Association twice posted our request to answer our services and prices survey in its newsletter. Our Memorial Society once considered asking the Funeral Directors Association to propose a representative to sit on our board. Is that a good idea to pursue now? Can we find other ways to work with funeral directors to make all of them sympathetic funeral directors? Could we get them to use coffins and urns bought elsewhere without a surcharge?
As the FTC requires.
Some large corporations have bought funeral homes but kept their familiar names. State law demands that these corporate-owned funeral homes include contact information about the corporation on all stationery, invoices, and ads.
And we make sure they do that.
And also add it to the funeral home's website.
Which is rarely done.
Can we get the M Board to make information public about funeral homes and directors who have been disciplined by the state? Let's consider these and other possibilities as we look to FCAEM's future as the advocate for funeral consumers in eastern and central Massachusetts.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Eva, for writing this history of FCAEM. Thank you all for reading. Thank you all who are watching this video.